To the aces of the Luftwaffe, the self-proclaimed masters of Europe's skies, it was a joke. Ein fliegender Milchflasche, a flying milk bottle. When the American P-47 Thunderbolt first lumbered over France in the spring of 1943, German pilots couldn't help but laugh at its bloated frame. The thing was gigantic, weighing up to 8 tons fully loaded, nearly double their agile Focke-Wulf 190s. They saw it as a slow, clumsy target, proof of what they mocked as crude American engineering. As one German ace later admitted, "We laughed. We made a terrible mistake." That laughter died in a storm of 50 caliber fire as they discovered the milk bottle was filled with 8 machine guns, a revolutionary engine built for high altitude and an almost supernatural toughness. They laughed until it wiped them from the sky. In early 1943, the air war over Europe was a lethal chessboard, and the Luftwaffe were its grandmasters. Their fighters were precision instruments, honed for years of dominance. Into this arena came the American challenger, the Republic P-47 Thunderbolt. At first glance, it looked like a blunder. Even American pilots were skeptical. Many, fresh from flying the nimble British Spitfire, climbed into the P-47 and were horrified. It felt like a truck. The cockpit was roomy, a small consolation for a machine that seemed sluggish and unresponsive. They nicknamed it Jug, short for Juggernaut, though at first the word carried no pride. Its designer, Georgian-born genius Alexander Kartveli, had been tasked by the U.S. Army Air Corps to build a high-altitude interceptor that could duel Germany's best. His solution was radical. Instead of a lightweight dogfighter, he built an aircraft around the most powerful engine available, the 18-cylinder Pratt & Whitney R2800 Double Wasp. To make it work, Kartveli created an enormous airframe and installed a pioneering turbo supercharger system. "It will be a dinosaur," he said, "but a dinosaur with good proportions, and a dinosaur it was. Empty, it weighed nearly 10,000 pounds. Fully armed, over 17,000. By comparison, an FW-190 weighed less than 9,000. The weight crippled its climb rate. In a turning fight, it was hopeless. It needed long runways, and its first combat mission on April 8, 1943, was a fiasco. Radios failed, and the mission was aborted. Over 2,000 sorties later, only 10 enemy kills had been recorded at the cost of 18 Thunderbolts. Luftwaffe pilots quickly learned to drag it into low-altitude turns, where it was easy prey. Even the Americans began to lose faith. To the Germans, the arrival of the Jug wasn't intimidating. It was amusing. They saw a plane built on brute force, lacking finesse. To them, it was proof that the Americans thought bigger meant better. The laughter in Luftwaffe mess halls was genuine. They'd face Spitfires and Mustangs. This wasn't it. What they failed to realize was that the P-47 wasn't built for their kind of fight. It was designed for a new kind of war. They judged it by their own narrow standards, missing the revolution inside its oversized frame. The P-47's secret wasn't agility, it was power. At high altitude, above 25,000 feet, the double Wasp engine and its supercharger system made it king of the stratosphere. The R2800 was a 2,000 horsepower marvel that, with water injection, could be pushed beyond 2,800. By comparison, the vaunted Daimler-Benz engines of the Bf-109 barely reached 1-800. Its radial design made it nearly indestructible, where liquid-cooled engines could die from a single bullet. The Thunderbolt's round cylinder array could take hits, leak oil, and still bring its pilot home. The Germans had mocked it as a milk jug, but soon that jug would pour fire from the heavens. The radial design created more drag, giving the P-47 its bulky profile. But it also meant there were no fragile coolant lines snaking through the fuselage. Luftwaffe pilots were accustomed to seeing a single cannon shell rupture a radiator or coolant pipe, sending an Allied plane spiraling down. The R2800, however, was an entirely different beast. It was air-cooled, and its sheer mass could absorb punishment that would destroy any inline engine. Stories abound of Thunderbolts returning home, with cylinders shot away and still running smoothly. Yet brute power alone wasn't the secret. At high altitudes, thin air starves engines of oxygen. Most fighters relied on gear-driven superchargers spun directly off the engine, effective but power-draining. Performance fell off sharply above 20,000 feet. The Thunderbolt's hidden advantage was its General Electric turbo supercharger. Rather than robbing the engine of power, it was driven by the exhaust itself, waste energy harnessed into raw thrust. A maze of ducts carried the hot gases down the fuselage to a rear turbine, spinning at over 20,000 RPM. That turbine compressed frigid air and rammed it back into the engine with immense pressure. The result was astonishing. While German fighters gasped for oxygen above 25,000 feet, the P-47's R-2800 roared stronger the higher it climbed. Its power held steady past 30,000 feet, in the same skies where American bombers fought for survival. Up there, the so-called Jug transformed from lumbering brute to predator, fast, stable, and deadly. Luftwaffe aces were dragged into a battlefield that stripped them of every advantage. The flying milk bottle had revealed its first secret. It wasn't designed to dance. It was built to hunt where nothing else could breathe. If the engine was its heart, the armament was its soul. German doctrine prized precision fire. The Americans went the other way. Overwhelming, unstoppable firepower. The Thunderbolt carried 850 caliber Browning M2 machine guns, 4 in each wing. It wasn't a fighter, it was a flying artillery platform. When a pilot opened fire, over 100 rounds per second filled the air. They didn't say they shot at the enemy, they projected a wall of lead. With up to 4,000 rounds on board, a P-47 could sustain nearly 30 seconds of continuous fire. By contrast, a Bf-109 could empty its magazines in seconds. The Jug's guns converged around 300 yards, and anything caught in that cone, wing, cockpit, or engine, was obliterated. The heavy 50 caliber rounds tore through armor and shattered engines with brutal efficiency. Luftwaffe ace Günther Ahr later described it as industrial execution. Dogfights became less duels of finesse and more acts of mechanical destruction. This ferocity was mounted on an airframe that was nearly indestructible. The P-47 was one of the toughest aircraft ever built. Its cockpit was encased in armor. The radial engine could take catastrophic hits and keep running, and its mass often allowed bullets to pass through without hitting vital systems. Tales of its durability became legend. Major Robert S. Johnson's ordeal on June 26, 1943, stands as the most famous. His P-47 was riddled by over 20 cannon shells and hundreds of machine gun rounds. Wounded, canopy shattered, and plane aflame, he tried to bail out, but the canopy jammed. Diving desperately, the fire blew out, and he limped home toward the channel. A lone Fisher 90 pounced. The German made repeated passes, riddling the battered Thunderbolt, but it refused to fall. Out of ammunition, the German pilot drew alongside, saluted the ghost he'd failed to kill, and turned away. Johnson brought the shredded machine, over 200 bullet holes, back to base. That flight defined the Thunderbolt's second revelation. It wasn't just a fighter. It was a fortress. Luftwaffe pilots, who expected their targets to crumble under gunfire, now faced a monster that refused to die. As Ace Heinz Bear put it, the P-47 could absorb an impossible amount of lead. The laughter was gone, replaced by dread. They were up against something unnatural. The P-47 was a weapon waiting for the right doctrine. Its early losses stemmed from pilots trying to fight the Luftwaffe's way, a fatal error. But sharp minds like Colonel Hubert Zemke of the 56th Fighter Group were about to change everything. They finally realized you don't send a heavyweight boxer to perform ballet. You train him to hit harder. The answer was a tactic as brutal as the plane itself. Boom and zoom. The strategy was simple yet deadly. P-47 pilots avoided turning dogfights entirely. Instead, they used their engine's unmatched power to climb high above their opponents. From over 30,000 feet, they scanned the skies below for German fighters. Once they spotted a target, they tipped over and dove. and in a dive nothing on earth could catch them. What was once a weakness, the Jug's massive weight, became its most terrifying strength. Gravity hurled the 8-ton fighter earthward at breakneck speed, pushing past 500 mph, faster than most planes could survive. At that velocity, the Thunderbolt turned into a guided missile. The attack came like a thunderclap, 1 second of sunlight, then a torrent of tracer fire. The pilot had only a moment to aim, fire, and blast past before zooming upward again to safety. It wasn't a duel, it was execution from above. This tactic changed everything, transforming the Thunderbolt into the 8th Air Force's deadliest escort. German pilots now had to climb through a ceiling of invisible killers before even reaching the bombers. By late 1943, intelligence reports that had once mocked the P-47 now warned of its growing menace. The aircraft evolved too. The old razorback canopy that limited rear vision was replaced with a bubble canopy, giving the pilot an unobstructed 360-degree view. A new paddle blade propeller improved climb, acceleration, and agility. The sluggish brute they once mocked could now climb and fight on equal terms. With speed, firepower, toughness, and visibility combined, the P-47 became an apex predator. The Luftwaffe's laughter turned to fear. When they looked up and saw those massive silhouettes circling high above, they knew death was waiting. Then came 1944 and the P-51 Mustang. With its unmatched range, it escorted bombers deep into Germany. For most fighters, this would have been the end. But the Thunderbolt found new purpose as a fighter bomber. The Germans had a name for it, spat out with dread, J-Bow. The Jug's massive engine allowed it to carry up to 2,500 pounds of bombs and 10 5-inch rockets, more than some light bombers. It became the perfect weapon for ripping apart the German war machine before D-Day. Thunderbolts scoured the countryside at treetop level, shredding railways, convoys, and fuel depots. Their 50-caliber guns tore trucks apart. Rockets destroyed tanks, bombs cratered roads. And the Jug could take punishment like nothing else. Low-level attack was a death sentence for most planes, but not the Thunderbolt. It came home smoking, torn, and riddled with holes, but still flying. There isn't a P-47 pilot alive who wouldn't belly one in rather than bail out, they said. On D-Day, it was everywhere, the roar of its engines striking terror. Jumbo fever spread among German troops. That sound meant death was seconds away. The statistics tell the story. From D-Day to VE Day, Thunderbolts destroyed 86,000 rail cars, 9,000 locomotives, 6,000 armored vehicles, and 68,000 trucks. They strangled the German front, crushing its supply lines. Field Marshal von Rundstedt himself admitted, Allied air power made troop movements impossible. The joke had become the juggernaut, yet the P-47's victory wasn't only about engineering, it was about philosophy. The Luftwaffe believed in elite aces. America believed in industrial power. The Thunderbolt embodied that doctrine. Between 1941 and 1945, 15 C-600 were built, one every hour at the peak. German factories, bombed and broken, could never compete. Over 125,000 R-2800 engines were produced by Pratt & Whitney, Ford, and Chevrolet, ensuring an endless stream of planes and parts. Damaged Jugs were repaired in days. German losses were permanent. Even training told the same story. US pilots logged hundreds of hours before combat. By war's end, Luftwaffe trainees barely had 100. The Americans weren't just building planes, they were building pilots, nearly 200,000 of them. And their logistics chain ensured endless supplies of fuel, ammo, and replacements. The Germans weren't fighting a plane. They were fighting the full weight of American industry. By May 1945, the Republic P-47 Thunderbolt had flown over 500,000 missions, destroyed thousands of enemy aircraft, and achieved a kill ratio above 4:1. From flying milk bottle to feared executioner, it became the ultimate symbol of power through persistence. As General Adolf Galland later said, it wasn't one battle that broke the Luftwaffe. It was the endless storm of American fighters darkening the skies. The P-47 was the steel fist of that storm. Its spirit lived on in the Fairchild Republic A-10 Thunderbolt II, the Warthog. The P-47's story is one of transformation. Ridicule turned to terror, laughter to legend. It began as a joke and ended as a juggernaut, a timeless reminder that in war, the weapon most mocked at first often becomes the one most feared in the end. By early 1945, the Republic P-47 Thunderbolt had become more than a weapon. It was a symbol of dominance. The once mocked milk bottle was now the hammer of the Allied air offensive, striking deep into the heart of Germany's collapsing war machine. But the story didn't end with victory in Europe. The P-47's evolution continued across new continents, new missions, and a changing vision of warfare that would shape the jet age. As the Allies prepared to finish the Pacific campaign, the Thunderbolt found a second theater where its rugged reliability and sheer firepower were invaluable. The newer P-47N, with extended wings and extra fuel capacity, was designed for one mission: escorting B-29 superfortresses across the vast Pacific. The distances were punishing, over 1,600 miles to reach Japan, yet the modified Thunderbolt proved up to the task. While the sleek Mustang gained fame for long-range raids, it was the P-47 that consistently survived the brutal tropical conditions. Its air-cooled engine laughed at the humidity that crippled liquid-cooled aircraft, and its pilots quickly adapted to the island-hopping war of attrition. In the Philippines, Okinawa, and Iwo Jima, Thunderbolts became flying artillery once again, strafing supply convoys, demolishing gun positions, and burning airfields to ash. Japanese anti-aircraft crews dreaded its growling engine as much as German soldiers had in Europe. When US pilot described the P-47 as a sledgehammer with wings, slow to start, but once moving unstoppable, in these closing battles, its endurance and survivability gave countless pilots the margin between life and death. When peace finally came, many believed the age of the piston fighter had ended. Jet aircraft were the future, faster and sleeker than anything the war had produced. Yet even in obsolescence, the Thunderbolt's DNA endured. Its philosophy, brute power, heavy armor, and devastating firepower, became the blueprint for a new generation of close air support aircraft. The Fairchild Republic A-10 Thunderbolt II, nicknamed the Warthog, would carry that legacy forward 3 decades later. Built by the same company and designed for the same purpose, to protect soldiers on the ground through overwhelming force and unbreakable toughness. The P-47's post-war career was equally impressive. Nations across Europe and Latin America adopted it as their frontline fighter. France flew them in Indochina, Mexico's Escuadron 201 used them in the Pacific, and Brazil's Thunderbolt supported Allied advances in Italy. Everywhere it went, the Jug earned the same reputation: dependable, fearless, indestructible. Today, the Thunderbolt stands as one of aviation's great paradoxes, a machine born in doubt, forged in ridicule, yet destined for greatness. It proved that innovation isn't always about elegance. Sometimes it's about endurance, willpower, and learning to fight on your own terms. From the skies over Normandy to the jungles of Luzon, the roar of its R-2800 engine became the sound of inevitability, the voice of victory itself. The P-47 didn't just win battles. It redefined what air power meant. It taught the world that dominance in the sky isn't achieved by grace or speed alone. It's earned through resilience, strength, and the relentless drive to keep climbing, no matter how heavy the wings.